Hey, welcome back, all. We are glad to welcome Anthony Lekkas. He, him is a cisgender bisexual man who is also a relationship counselor, mental health social worker, and a bi plus community advocate. Anthony works in mainstream and queer community health services and is passionate about bi plus advocacy and discussions about polyamory and non-traditional forms of bonding. And we're glad to have a really deep dive discussion today. So go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Derek. Thank you, everyone, for having me here. It's so lovely to be, I guess, zooming into Europe because I get to say Happy Bi-Vis Day to everyone twice. We did that here yesterday in Australia, and it's lovely to say that to you all again. I'm just going to share my screen. You're just going to have to bear with me because IT is not my strongest point, but there we go. Got it. My name, yes, is Anthony Lekkas. I am in Melbourne, Australia, and I'm not a researcher. Most of my talk today is not only coming from the experiences that I've had myself as a bisexual person in the world, but also some of the tensions and worries that are coming to my practice for not only individual therapy, but in relationship counselling, whether that's with one or more partners. And so I wanted to share this this term with you, decidophobia, which I came across, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But I just wanted to say thank you for having me here at this forum, and it's so energizing to be in a bi-centered space. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I live, provide services, and move about on, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to their elders past and present and express our hope for reconciliation, justice, and the recognition of the ongoing living culture of all Aboriginal people. I want to acknowledge Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander, and any First Nations people here with us today, and I pay my respects to your elders and ancestors. I wanted to see, look, cameras are off and that's fine. I'm not sure how it's going to go here today. So I'm hoping that there is some opportunity for comments and reflections and questions. So please at any stage, just unmute and just fire off your comment or question, and that's totally okay. And even better if you can show your face, but you can remain faceless if you wish, but it'll be lovely to have some voices. So I want to make this a bi-affirming space. We're going to center the needs and experiences of bi people and voices. So, but also for non-bi people, please, it's a joy to have allies and people who come along the journey with us when we're talking about bi people's lives. So thank you for being here also. Again, usually with this presentation, some people tend to disclose personal information about their own experiences of bisexuality and what that's meant for their relationships. So just take care of your own disclosures and how you manage your own self-care at your end, and you know what you need to do around that. So confidentiality is not guaranteed. It's being recorded. And also we can't manage how you adjust your volume and who gets to hear this presentation at your end. But I just trust that we all do our best to make this space as safe as possible so that we can share freely. You know, I want to also, some of these ideas are new for me also. I'm just grappling with them, and I'm having the opportunity to share them with colleagues. The idea on, or the concept of decidophobia with bisexual, the bisexual experience. So, you know, there might be a lot some of us might want to say about it. There might be a little, but let's just try and offer each other a chance to share. I'll speak at you. I'm sorry, I will speak at you for a little bit for, you know, 25 minutes or so, and then I'll well, maybe not even that long, and I might just fire out a question or just ask for some reflections just to see where everyone's at. I'm not watching the chat. I can't see the chat, so I won't be responding to anything in the chat. But please, by all means, if there's a discussion happening there, go for it. You've probably seen this definition of bisexuality by Robin Oakes, who is well known bi activist from the USA, who's probably at this conference. I I'll read it out, and then I want to talk a little bit about it. So it's probably the definition that best encapsulates the dynamic experience that I've had in terms of my understanding of my own sexuality. So the quote says, "I call myself bisexual because I acknowledge that I have in myself the potential to be attracted romantically and or sexually to people of more than one sex and or gender, not necessarily at the same time, not necessarily in the same way, and not necessarily to the same degree." It's a beautiful definition. And this is not the experience on your screen, this definition. This is not the experience for people who are monosexual. Okay, so people who identify as gay, lesbian, or straight. Given that our social structures are designed to respond to the needs of those who are monosexual when it comes to sexuality, attraction, and relationships, then it's likely that bisexual people will experience all sorts of tensions and anxieties when it comes to conforming with dominant ideas about sexuality and relationships. All right, so this definition does not reflect dominant ideas about attraction, love, sexuality, and relationships. And we just need to look at pop culture. We just need to turn on the television to see the sorts of images and representation that we have of sexuality and relationships, which is usually, hetero is still the most dominantly presented version of a romantic relationship. We do have a lot of queer or same sex or gender representation of relationships now in all sorts of areas of pop culture, of sort of mainstream television. And they all have something in common, though, when we're talking about monosexuality, that these relationships exist as couple relationships, first and foremost, and with a person of the same or another gender. Okay, and that tends to be the kind of dominant, entrenched, hardwired in message about relationships. Okay, I mean, in Australia, the federal law around marriage, right, which they changed the wording of the definition in 2017 with an awful postal survey.
What did you say?
Sorry, someone speaking? No, that might have just been a mistake. The postal survey, which people of Australia voted for the marriage law to be changed to include same gender relationships. So they managed to take care of that bit, to take out the homophobic language. But now it's marriages between two people, not a man and a woman, but two people entered into for life to the exclusion of all others. So we've got a very strong and solid idea of what a legal marriage, what a legitimate relationship looks like in Australia and probably in other countries as well. Again, that legislation perhaps doesn't fit neatly, doesn't coincide or, neatly blend in with this definition of bisexuality. And I'm happy to be debated on that. I just another thing on this quote. In my 20s, I used to understand, and I'm 46 now, so this definition came out not when I was in my 20s, but a definition like this, I used to experience my own bisexuality as ambivalence. That was the term that was offered to me. I remember once in therapy. I want to talk about therapy spaces. If some of you are therapists or social workers or in the helping professions, about by affirming responses to people who are bisexual who come to us for support. But ambivalence was a term that was given to me by therapists, and it was useful for me because it got me to grapple with some of what I thought was the messiness of my attractions, my capacity to be attracted, right? Such as feeling confused, right? Not confused about being bisexual. I want to make that absolutely clear, but who to stay in a long-term monogamous relationship with. Right? What would I do with my attractions to all of the genders if I was in a relationship with one gender? Like, where would they go, these attractions? Would they just disappear? I wondered, would I fantasize about a person of another gender? And would that be okay? Would I regret not being with them, even if I was, in fact, in a loving relationship with a person of a particular gender? So I wondered about investing worry into a future that I had no idea about, whether, what my future was going to look like in terms of love and intimacy. I went through this strange period, and for bi people in the audience, if any of this resonates, please step in and share if you feel okay to. But in my 20s, I remember going through this really weird, it's silly to me now, but it's this really weird experience where I felt like if I was in a relationship with a man at one point, the next relationship must be a woman, right? And then when I was in a relationship with a woman, then the one after that needed to be a man, right? And cisgendered people. And I did have a relationship with a trans woman in my mid-20s as well. But it's almost like I was looking for a way to sort of balance it out. Like what did my bisexuality mean? What was the most appropriate and legitimate way to be bisexual in the world? Maybe that was it, to find the right balance, right? And which sounds a bit silly to talk about now, but in my 20s, I didn't have community around me. I didn't have any representation. I didn't know any other bisexual person other than myself in my 20s. So no bi person should have to work that stuff out on our own because of dominant systems and structures, dominant messages and ideas about love, intimacy, attraction, and sexuality. By people left to themselves, of course, we're going to start to defer to some of these dominant thinkings around sexuality. Am I gay? Am I straight? How gay am I? How straight am I? Rather than just being fully bisexual all the time. This is a quote from a client of mine. I've got a couple of quotes. I've got permission to share these, and I've just changed their names to pseudonyms. So Sally, age 32, cis bi woman. I get so anxious about investing too much intimately with my partner, who's a male, and just keep thinking, maybe I should be with women. I think I should be with a woman. I feel like I'm leading my male partner on. I hate that I do this, but my sexual desire for my male partner is so strong. I worry I may not have that with a woman. I just wanted to mention that around multi-gender attraction, living in a culture that prescribes particular ways of expressing your sexuality that doesn't fit neatly for multi-gender attracted people like Sally here. Okay, so the tension, what we might call an internal tension, her grappling with this, but my sexual experience is strong with my male partner. What happens if I don't get that with a woman? Maybe I should stay with the man, but I'm attracted to women. Pat, age 24, and again, we might think of this as one of those external pressures. So thinking about external and internal pressures on bi people around multi-gender attraction. I worry that people will think I am leading her on. I have only ever openly shown my interest in men, right, to my friends and family, but I really want to be with her. I worry about losing my gay friends. Okay, there's often a misconception that bi men are really gay, and bisexuality is that one-stop shop before actually living your truer self. The bi now, gay later idea. And I think for bi women, there's this misconception that you're not really bi, you're just doing it for attention, and you're just doing it because it's a fun thing to do. So you're never truly bisexual, but going through a particular phase, which is a common misconception. Some of the tensions there, external and internal. I'm mentioning these because these are the experiences that as bi people, and again, for bi people in the audience, please feel free to share anything that resonates with you. But, we have internal pressures and external ones, but I've got a problem with the word internalized biphobia, although we build a relationship with this worry that we have around our own sexuality, right? Because it's given such a hard time, we will tend to adopt some of these awful ideas about bisexuality, just like gay and lesbian people will in terms of internalized homophobia. But there's just, so we build because of this kind of the dominant, again, narrative, the sort of white hetero patriarchal structures that tell us that white people are special and more important, straight people are special, more important, and men of all, in terms of all the other genders, are more important, more valued, smarter, better, all that sort of stuff. So that's the baseline for how we start to imagine ourselves and think about ourselves in terms of our location, in terms of those things, race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality. All right, so those of us at the bottom of a hierarchy within a particular location of self, of identity, often have a lot of proving to do and tend to grapple with this idea that we are less than because of that particular part of me. Right, so that sense of internalized oppression, we build a relationship that because dominant structures won't change in our lifetime. So of course, that tension will be there. I'll talk about the term decidophobia in a minute. I'm building to it. I just wanted to mention a couple of things about bisexual people in relationships. I talked about the lack of representation. We need to be able to have ourselves represented out in the world there so that we have language to access, we have images to use, we have ways of being able to say, yes, that's me. There's a resonance to that. There's a way that settles something for all of us when we have ourselves represented in the world, something that we can connect to. I am preaching to the converted here. I'm sure you know all this and agree with this, but I think it's important to mention, particularly because biphobia can exist in Australia. I'm not sure about perhaps internationally as well from what I've read, but biphobia exists just as frequently and as strongly in queer spaces as it does in mainstream spaces, hetero spaces. All right, again, because of monosexism, that's a dominant structure around sexuality that we all bump up against. Okay, that's the desired form of sexuality, to be monosexual. You can be attracted to men, you can be attracted to women, but that's about it. Coming out to partners, we're the only sexuality also that has to come out to partners. I mean, think about that for a minute. If you're a bisexual person, if the gender of your partner, like for example, myself as a cisgendered male, if my partner's a woman, she will just presume that I'm straight. I'll have to come out to her and explain to her that I'm not. Just as I have been with men who have just presumed that I'm gay because we're both men, I've had to come out to them, right? Because I'm not gay. I'm bisexual. And that's something that, it's the only sexuality. We are the only sexuality who have to come out to our partners. All right. And given the pervasiveness of biphobia, that puts us already in a very risky position with someone we're actually attracted to, someone that we've already invested some hopes and dreams into, right? That we have to declare our sexuality and, hope for the best, and of course there's going to be biphobia because of monosexism, just like, of course, there's racism because of whiteness and white supremacy. Of course, there's sexism and misogyny, right, because of patriarchy. What do you expect? Of course, that stuff's going to be there. I'm not saying it's okay, but of course, that stuff's going to be there. Right? So, there are risks for bi people to come out, to emotional risks, perhaps. Some maybe worse. I think that, with that point, the sexual assault for bi women and trans women as well, disproportionately high rates of sexual assault and intimate partner violence for bi women. And that's the perpetrators are straight or bi men, right? So cisgendered men. So there are risks for women in, some relationships. We know that domestic violence is a global issue, not just something that happens here in Australia to women. So I just want to go back a step, but the coming out to partners, so there's this idea of proving our sexuality. We're the only sexuality also that has to hear from people when we come out to them, that we hear them say to us, "No, you're not." Right? I mean, if bi people are there, I mean, tell me what you think. But how often do we tell people we're bisexual and they tell us that we're not? You're really gay, or maybe you're not ready, or are you confused, or I mean, that might not be the response every time, but that's a pretty common response, that we're the only sexuality that get told, no, you're not, right? Again, because of monosexism. Just want to reinforce that dominant, external, cultural and political social structure that exists there around sexuality. And Julia Taylor in Australia, 2018, the Who I Am study, where it was the largest ever mental health study on bisexuality in the country, in Australia, who found that bi people fared worse on scales on, mental health scales of anxiety, depression and suicidality. right, than people who identified as gay and lesbian. So our queer counterparts, we tend to have poorer mental health than gay or lesbian people. As cisgendered bi people and trans bi people, even worse. Okay, so there's something about, there were lots of considerations and ideas about that in the study, but I think about disrupting sort of normalized structures, about what bisexuality does to monosexism. And I think for trans people as well, disrupting binary entrenched normative structures around gender. And how, you just look at the awful amount of transphobia that's existing globally at the moment. Right? It's just how inconvenient trans and non-binary and gender diverse people are to dominant ideas about gender, binary gender. Right? So these are some of the experiences that, negative, I guess, experiences of bisexual people in relationships. So this is the term. I've been searching for a way to talk about this tension on the inside that I have found, or any of this ongoing experience throughout my 20s in particular, where I noticed that I was in therapy for quite a lot, where I was so anxious about, choosing the wrong gendered partner. When I was with a male, I always wondered about women and I'd fantasize about women, and maybe I could bond better with women and I get along better with women. And then I was in a relationship with a woman. I find myself constantly fantasizing about being with a man. And that tension never went anywhere. I just managed to turn the volume down on it occasionally, but it never really went anywhere. And I found this word, decidophobia. It comes from Walter Kaufman, who is a philosopher. It was coined in 1973 from his book, Without Guilt and Justice, From Decidophobia to Autonomy. It's a term that was used in a pathologizing sense, just like other phobias used to describe certain pathologies like social phobia, arachnophobia, other types of phobias. I'm not referring to the anxiety around choosing the inverted commas, making the right choice in partner selection as a phobia in the pathological sense here. I want to be clear about that. I'm not describing anything that happens to queer people as pathological, right? Because of external tensions and because of biphobia. I'm not sort of suggesting that, but decidophobia is just the term I'm using to describe just that struggle, that struggle that bi people encounter as they're trying to fit within a social, cultural, and political system that is designed to accommodate the needs of people who are monosexual, right? Not bisexual. That's my argument. So some of the features of decidophobia can exist. I've got some on the screen. So fear of being seen with your partner. This is one that came from a client who told me that he was at dinner with his female partner, first female partner he ever had. And I think he was in his 20s. And he was at the dinner table. He was so anxious in his local neighborhood having dinner, a date with a woman he was investing his feelings in and he was attracted to and he wanted to have a relationship with. But again, like the quote with Pat earlier, people had only ever known him to be gay. He'd only ever outed himself as gay. He had used the term gay with some people. And as bi people, we have funny things that we do with language when we don't want to use the word bisexual, right? Because of biphobia, because of the decisions we make to avoid having people say and do awful things to that term when we use it, right? So we might use the word queer, we might, we might use other terms, but, he was so anxious about having people walk past the restaurant and see him having dinner with a woman because he was worried about people thinking that he would be misleading her because he's gay. We've only ever known him as gay, right? And I guess what I'm saying is because of monosexism, the presumption is that you're either gay or straight. So this young man's gay friends never imagined he would be bisexual because of monosexism, right? No one does unless you're bisexual. No one will. I mean, we're getting better. I mean, our culture and our queer activism has progressed, right? But typically it still occurs. Monosexism is still very powerful. Powerful enough for this young person to tell me about that anxiety at the dinner table on his first date. So there's image management sort of refers to that, the way that we, share kind of aspects of our queerness to people, mostly probably in only queer spaces, and in mainstream or non-queer spaces, we may not, or we may just, talk about our relationships in more vague terms, if in fact we are in a queer relationship, or if we're in a straight passing relation, appearing, I should say, a straight appearing relationship, right? And we might choose to correct people if they want to presume that we're heterosexual. So we make decisions in conversations as bi people, with how we pick up on the way people understand us or make assumptions about us in conversation. And I think that I know that for colleagues of mine and for myself, I'd get very anxious when I didn't correct people if they had just presumed that I was gay, and I would get that more than straight. That people would think I was gay more than I was straight. Often surprised, and often would look at me with raised eyebrows if I talked about attractions or dates or partners who are women. It's like, what's he doing? What's he up to? What's he up to was something that was said to me once. So again, the anxiety is about correcting people. Constant worrying if we've made the right choice in partner. I spoke to that point earlier. The feeling or fearing a sense of loss because of who you choose. Right? This is another one I'm seeing a lot in my practice, where people in monogamous relationships who are coming into therapy, they are in a loving relationship, right? They love their partner loves them back, right? They want to be in that relationship, but they are fearing that they'll never have the opportunity to express their bisexuality through sexual behavior, right, with someone of another gender that's not their partner's gender, right? And they're already sort of having a sense of loss around that. And then, I think one of the stronger symptoms, if you like, of decidophobia is the reluctance to commit to anyone, any one person in a relationship, in an intimate relationship sense. So these are some of the impacts. Going to great lengths to avoid making decisions, relying on others to make. I'm not sure that these are some of the comments that have come from Walter Kaufman around his definition of decidophobia. But I really wanted to just comment on the last one there. By refusing to make a decision about being with a particular partner, we're already doing what we fear most. Right? Refusing to make a decision is actually a decision you're making, which comes with some anxieties as well. All right, does that make sense? So I think that I just want to say this, especially that this is normal. Again, decidophobia is normal. This is not a pathology. There are no personality deficits here. We are not in need to perform any personality transplants on anyone or anything like that. For bi people, decidophobia is a very normal and natural response to monosexism and non-bi friendly cultural practices and norms around sexuality, relationships, and intimacy. That relationship with that tension, just like with internalized oppression of whatever sort, that we build a relationship with that tension for a lifetime. Right? That doesn't, I mean, it sounds a bit grim when we say like that, but there are times where we may feel that tension more strongly than others, but this is a tension that comes along with us because of being bisexual. Finding other bi plus people to discuss this with is critical to mental health. And this is, I get a lot of people coming for individual therapy, not a large amount of people, bisexual people coming to talk to me about this tension about making the wrong choice, but it does come up. The most common presentation in my practice for people who are bisexual are people who are wanting to talk to their partners about non-monogamy. I see that a lot, and that's why I wrote this quote. That is non-monogamy an antidote to decidophobia? Probably, right? Perhaps it has been for me as a poly person. Polyamory brings with it a whole bunch of other tensions, because we disrupt all sorts of other social and cultural scripts around intimacy and relationships with polyamory or ethical non-monogamy. But probably, it is not unusual for bi people to go to therapy, to talk to their therapist about potentially opening up their relationship, so that they don't have to choose. We don't have to choose. And that does, I mean, look, straight people are into polyamory and non-monogamy also, right? I mean, non-monogamy is not just for bi people, but there are particular unique and specific reasons, I think, that some bi people might want to sort of grapple with the option of opening up their relationship, right? And I think it can be an antidote to decidophobia. I wonder, Derek, if it's okay if I pause it there just to get some reactions, just so I can gauge the room. I'm not sure how everyone's going with this. I just wanted to see if I could get people's reactions or comments or any questions.
Yes, this is excellent so far. Anybody in the audience have a question that they wanted to elevate at the moment? Maybe I'll start. I really like this presentation that maybe as I'm reading it, kind of emphasizes the individual and their internal struggle. For starters, I think some folks in the chat were curious about how people have been presenting themselves in the workplace. If you could talk about that.
We had a study. We've got the Stand By Us conference happening in Australia as we speak, and one of the presentations talked about this. And we know that there's a lot of evidence for improved health and well-being when you're able to be out in your workplace in a safe and affirming environment. So when that is not there, then yeah, absolutely. We having to manage aspects of yourself in conversation, and then to remember who knows what. Who did I tell this with? And maybe the more we get to know work colleagues, family members, anyone in our lives, we might tend to share a little bit more information. And so coming out becomes this tension around, who we've come out to, in what ways, to what degree, and what information do people have about us, especially when people talk about your partner and your family life. Can be very anxious for people in the workplace. So I'm not answering the question, but I guess I'm just noting that having affirming and supportive workplaces where people can be out and to not be subjected to discrimination is absolutely critical to mental health and actually productivity in the workplace. Can I also say this? My first ever job for a queer organisation, I was very proud to work there for a well-known, I'm not naming names here, right? Because I really love the organisation, but I think it's important to state this was a sort of well-known sort of gay men's health centre, if you like, queer men's health centre, it should be really. But and that was the first time I ever experienced really overt and brutal biphobia. I had attended that community organisation as a client many, many years ago, prior to, graduating and practicing as a therapist and applying for all sorts of jobs in the community. But it was to my horror that I experienced biphobia in the workplace at a queer organisation. So that was quite damaging. I didn't use the word bisexual for about my first 2 years there because of that experience. And then in the end, I was one of those kind of shouty bisexuals that I'd yell the word bisexual out every second I got. But I don't know if I answered the question.
Yes, that was wonderful. And we're still going to welcome other questions, I believe.
Please, yeah, I have one question. I have one question to you. Like, I am actually living in India where the entire culture and the social setup is very, very different and diverse. So my question to you is that you being an activist, it might sound little sarcastic to you, but still, like, I actually want to address this question because most of the activists actually keep on trumpeting the laurel that in order to make yourself visible, you have to come out of the closet and you have to make your presence inclusive. Now, for a conservative ecosystem where there are irreparable damage that can coming out of the closet, be it the social embarrassment, be it the everyday or the dailiness of the diatribe that we have to endure, in certain circumstances, we have to be in the closet. But we being bisexual, we are always problematizing and we are contradicting the heteronormative and the social and say the social architecture of the homo normative. That way, how you see a closet as a political process that can also somewhat can be seen in a positive manner rather than actually it is being observed in a negative lens. So can you just relate it with the intersectional standpoint, so it can make much more it can actually add some clarity to my observation. Yeah.
Thank you, Victor. What a solid point you're making, and the closet as a political process. I really love that phrase, and and I agree with you that there are certain versions of queerness or bisexuality that are more privileged than others. I mean, the color of my skin and my geographical location in Australia allows me to express my bisexuality very different to, say, someone in India who's bisexual. Absolutely, and I think that the term closet does have very negative connotations to it, and it does need to be reviewed. I'm with you on that, because there is something about managing privacy and safety because of the degree of persecution and the possibility of persecution and violence that you could be subjected to, and also losing access to community, cultural norms and customs and family rituals. And I mean, there's a lot of, and I'm learning this as a white person, particularly with people in non-Western countries, around the balancing the sort of variety of priorities that exist in the world as a person who's more than just bisexual, but also someone who belongs to a community and a particular and who likes to and who values expressing, connecting with particular customs and cultural norms. Does that did that answer your question, Victor?
Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah, thanks.
I think I just want to speak to Victor's point a little bit more, because there's something about, again, if we're thinking about those sort of broader structures, those dominant structures, again, around particularly whiteness and the way sort of white supremacy and sort of Western culture looks after people who are bisexual, who are queer, who are any sexuality, really, because of the color of our skin. I just thinking about that around the sort of degree of fetishization and problematizing of bi people of color. I think bi people are seen as inconvenient and disruptive because of sexuality anyway, but a person with black or brown skin who's bisexual gets problematized in such, I guess, harsher ways because of racism, right? Because of whiteness. And I think that, practices of intersectionality, around Victor's point, is an ongoing process. And I think that there is something about the lack of intersectional thinking, I guess, when we're doing queer activism. So I want to sort of reinforce that point.
We have a question here, hand raised from Andrew Milnes.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know why my camera isn't working at the moment, but I'm going to have to fix that. But anyway, no, it wasn't really a question. It was more just verifying what sort of reinforcing what you'd said, Anthony, about biphobia in different spaces. And I mean, I've certainly encountered biphobia in, the straight world and in gay spaces and organizations, and even in bi spaces as well, which was unfortunate. But I've often found that in gay spaces, in some ways I don't know if overt is the right term, but I think it's almost like there's been elements, and this is probably more in the past, so hopefully it's changed a bit, but of sort of turf. This is our sort of queer turf that we have to fight for, and you're coming into this and you've got to be sort of one of us kind of thing. And there's there's a bit of a sort of reactive, oh, well, you've got to be online, on board with us and our politics. I know certainly a lot of bi women have experienced that from lesbians in lesbian space, but I think there has been elements of it sometimes for bi men in gay spaces, whereas heteronormativity often I found the biphobia there and monosexism has been more insidious but subtle, because it's a whole system of, you know, like why people don't exist, and you can't exist within this monosexist system, so you must be really X, Y, and Z, and we don't even often speak of it, kind of thing. So, but I mean, that was sort of my experience. So I found that dynamic quite interesting.
And I agree with that, Andrew, that there is something about biphobia being so much more upfront and in your face, almost relentlessly shameless. And I don't know if people, I feel almost embarrassed to use this phrase here because it's so sickening, but it's one that I've heard in sort of queer male, gay male spaces, the term platinum gay. Have people heard that term and what that means in the terms of gay misogyny? It means that, you know, there's something about how perverse or dirty gay men see bi men because they've had contact with a woman's vagina. But a platinum gay person is someone who was born through cesarean, so has never touched or passed through a vagina. It's a sickening thing to think about, but I want to say that because of the extent of gay male misogyny. And what it says about who, in fact, gets a legitimate seat at the queer male table. So just for Andrew's point there. So yeah, really in your face. If I might maybe just take one more comment, and then I want to talk a little bit about non-monogamy and polyamory, if that's all right. Personal safety is the main point. Yeah, personal safety, absolutely, Riley. Thank you. Any other comments? Or it's a quiet conference, isn't it? Oh, this session is anyway. Like this.
The chat is very noisy, but you can't see it, Anthony.
Thanks, Kay. All right. I trust that people are looking after.
We have a hand raised from Stephen here.
Thanks, Stephen.
Hi. So one of the things I've recently gotten involved in publishing more, publishing in the trade business, publishing genre fiction. And one of the things that's been really interesting to me, so I'm writing stories that have queer protagonists. And so I've been interested in exploring the intersection between publishing and the queer publishing world. And what I had noticed is that queer characters are becoming more and more acceptable in regular traditional publishing. But yet my experience interacting with the queer publishing world has been that queer people see the worlds as utterly disjunct from one another, with almost no intersection or alignment between them at all. And so this has been this kind of odd juxtaposition. And I'm interested in whether or not you have any perspectives on the fact that in many ways, I think traditional culture, in spite of the current anti-trans hysteria that the right wing has been whipping up, that I think general culture is becoming more and more accepting of queer people, and yet the queer population seems to still see themselves as disjunct.
I don't know anything about the publishing world, but your broader comment around, you know, queer representation amongst mainstream spaces and responses there, I think there is a type of straight friendly gay, a version of the straight, you know, because I think about Mitch and Cam in A Modern Family, that sort of representation of a gay male couple who's a bit of a joke. You don't take them too seriously, and they're kind of endearing and cute, but they're not to be taken too seriously, and they are a bit campy and effeminate. And that, not that that's a bad thing, but there's a particular type of queerness that is able to be stomached by mainstream spaces based on how what makes sense to them, you know. So I think that there is still something very restrictive and sort of limiting about that, but you know, I don't know if that speaks to what you're saying there.
And if I can jump in.
Please, Kay.
Hi, I used to work in publishing, and my name is Kay and I'm a book addict. So one of the experiences that I've observed is that queer characters and relationships are acceptable in non-realistic settings. So there's an awful lot of queer relationships and people and non-binary people and poly situations in science fiction and fantasy, magic realism, and even to some extent in those books that are centering different time spans. So back in the 1950s, Mary Renault, who was a lesbian, wrote about gay male relationships in classic Roman times. And that was something, because she had done a setting that wasn't her own time, she was able to get away with it. Whereas when she tried to have lesbian relationships in a contemporary setting, that wasn't acceptable by the publishers fearing censorship or sales. And it's the same thing, that if you look at whether it's Game of Thrones or Star Trek Discovery, that there's a lot of settings that are starting to push the boundaries. And of course, younger people looking at graphic novels, and Heartstoppers, the series, was successful as a comic before it was translated into a live current one. So it's that thing of like, yes, we're making progress, but depending on which country you're in. India, there's, Victor may be able to talk to it, there's how gods and deities and others, in a non-realistic setting are portrayed, enabling that acceptance. So if you want to push the boundaries and get published and you're not sure if it's going to be mainstream acceptable, then go for a different setting. But it is, New Zealand's starting to get some successes in mainstream, like one of the recent prize winners at a national award, Greta and Valden, sent us a gay brother and sister and their contemporary relationships, and that's acceptable now, but it wouldn't have been 5 years ago. So, boundaries have been pushed, but I'll stop talking because I can go on forever.
Thank you.
I love the passion there, and yeah, it's a really interesting point around where these things can be talked about in acceptable ways, and in what time, and the distance. There's something about not being too close, not in my backyard, right? So there's just something about, it's interesting to think about that, and who gets to decide, who has the authority to decide about whether this is okay or not. Is really interesting. Thank you for those comments. There's about 10 minutes left.
Just a last little thing. The internet's also made a really big difference, so that you're getting both self-publishing and e-publishing, making a difference that people can effectively publish to a smaller audience and with newsletters be picked up. And so again, this thing of how can people publish safely? And so that whole thing of sometimes it starts as free fiction, short stories, and then gets picked up by a mainstream, but it's that, depending on where people are, is it okay to put it out? And with the internet enabling anonymity, people can use a fake name, just like in the old days when women could only be published if they used a male name to have their books come out under, so we've got different ways of people trying to, the creativity's always been there, but it's like, how do you connect it with the audience?
Right, and that speaks to the image management idea I mentioned earlier, just around kind of preserving identity, maybe workplace status, connection to particular communities and groups. So I want to, I can't speak to the publishing space, but thank you. I think the themes are very much still the same in terms of sort of the dominance of the mainstream idea of what's acceptable in terms of sexuality and relationship. I can tell you now from the relationship counselling space in Melbourne, Victoria anyway, they're by people who are wanting to have conversations about non-monogamy, ethical non-monogamy in their relationships. They struggle to find a therapist who does not see or hear that desire to do so as some sort of attachment disorder or disordered thinking, or some way trying to breach some kind of, kind of acceptable boundary of relationship connection. So I think that, again, bisexual people experience tensions in terms of speaking about bisexuality, how they choose their partner, if in fact they are interested in monogamy and in a relationship with one other person, but also tensions around even just talking about ethical non-monogamy in a space that's presumably meant to be safe and confidential, like therapy. There aren't a lot of therapists in Melbourne. There might be more internationally and overseas. I do get clients who I see from other countries as well for relationship counselling. That yes, there's sort of lack of resources and thinking and sort of literature and sort of practice approaches to respond to the needs of bisexual people in non-monogamous relationships. I might just get the slides up again, but we're kind of, the discussion was, mate, can I just, maybe I might just ask people here who are bisexual and are either currently in a non-monogamous relationship or a poly relationship, whether or not that's been something that's been able to, you know, take care, if you like, of that tension around bisexuality with this sort of pressure to decide on, you know, who your life mate might be or a sort of intimate relationship is going to be with. There's something about your choice in choosing non-monogamous as a more suitable way of doing love and intimacy if it takes care of a particular tension around bisexuality. Does that question make sense to people? Yep. Does someone want to? Carolyn, you look like you want to.
Yeah, I would say that, you know, similar, like I identify as bisexual, and I would say similar to the way that I experience my sexual identity. You know, I see the framework or structure of my relationship as being something that's fluid. And so the way that you know, the way that it exists today may not be the way that it exists in the future. And I mean, part of that is, for me, you know, being very comfortable with that degree of uncertainty, but trusting, I would say, like in myself to understand what my needs are and, you know, being able to ensure that my needs are being met in one way or another. So I would say fluidity and just, again, kind of seeing what each day brings.
Thanks, Carolyn. And is that fluidity in terms of relationship structure and how a relationship is set up?
I think so. Yeah. Right now, you know, I'm in a monogamous relationship. I have been for many years, but I think my partner and I both understand that that might not be the way that it exists forever. You know, again, so the way that I experience my, you know, sexual identity, attraction to people is the same way that I kind of think about the relationship structure.
That's lovely. It speaks to Robin Oakes's definition, I think, of bisexuality around the. Kay, you got your hand up.
Yes, it's not so much of an active point, but some years back I did explore more of an active polyamorous sort of, you know, identity. And one of the things I found useful was the chapter in The Ethical Slut on negotiating limits and the rest. And I recommend that chapter to people regardless of whether they want to explore outside their relationship or primary relationship, because it really helps, you know, building those connections with whoever you're currently relating to. So for me, it was more that exploring those ideas gave me better tools for working on whichever relationship I was currently in. You know, it wasn't just about the dating different people. It was about negotiating equality and what I wanted and getting it. These days, I don't have the energy in any way of lockdowns, you know, but I still value those negotiating skills.
Spot on, Kay. And I've said that too, that anyone who's doing any type of relationship to, not just around, you know, literature like The Ethical Slut and the ideas in there, but even just to have a go at doing non-monogamy because of what's required, because we are going against a particular way of thinking, a normalized way of, inverted commas, normalized way of sort of doing love and intimacy that requires very deliberate thinking and planning and discussing and overting. You know, I know a lot of my clients, we talk about the sort of the no surprise policy, where we, of course, we're going to stumble across insecurities and you know, making people anxious for all sorts of reasons, because it is an anxious thing to experience your partner leaving you to go and spend time with somebody else that they desperately love and are passionate about being with. And then you sort of get sort of accustomed to the sort of relationship model, and with some good communication and guidelines, like you said, Kay, some of these anxieties get settled. But there is something about, so, you know, non-monogamy does get us to think more deliberately and actively around negotiation and talking about our responsibilities, what they might be when it comes to making people feel safe and secure in their intimate bond. And I know relationship anarchists may not be very happy with this comment I'm about to make, because they usually aren't, but I love the core principles of relationship anarchy. I think that they are, you know, reflecting kind of what you're saying there, Kay, about ongoing negotiation and not holding on to your assumptions about people just because of our ideas about genders and relationships and stereotypes. But I think that we do have responsibilities in our relationships to be there for our partners, to be accessible, to be responsive and engaged when there are particular anxieties around disconnection. And these anxieties around disconnection are likely to occur in non-monogamous setups, because in these types of relationships, we get to experience our partners leaving us to spend time with somebody else that they love and care about and have sex with and experience love with. So yeah, there is a lot of working through, a lot of skill building stuff there that happens really quickly. You get a really quick crash course on how you do communication and empathic attunement, I guess, in non-monogamous setups.
We are just about winding down on time. If you had any final concluding or take-home message, now might be a good point.
My final message is, if you're a bi person, you do not need to do non-monogamy to reach your fullest potential around bisexuality. What might be something else that we can do to fend off, or not fend off, but manage this experience of decidophobia, if that is in fact what this tension can be described as? Well, we need more representation. We need more spaces, even in our own monogamous relationships, regardless of the gender of our partner, where we can speak openly and freely about our attraction to all genders and other people, and what it's like to have that or not have that. There is something about the needing to name and overt and talk more openly and freely about bisexuality in an affirming and celebratory way. I think there's something about that. If not non-monogamy, then at least that.
All right, it's been great. Really enjoyed the conversation that you brought and helping us really think about why we are here at a conference like this. So yes, please give a Zoom congratulations to Anthony here, and we'll continue on with the conference.
Thank you.